When did a bully get a taste of their own medicine? Stop speaking that gibberish in public, my cousin Sophia hissed while we walked through the mall. You sound like you just got off the boat. This is America. Speak English. I'd been speaking Mandarin with my mom about picking up ingredients for our Chinese New Year dinner, but Sophia acted like I'd committed a crime. She was 2 years older and had spent her whole life trying to erase every trace of our Chinese heritage. Real Americans don't cling to old world nonsense, she said while steering me away from other shoppers. You're never going to fit in if you keep acting like some fob who doesn't belong here. We were supposed to be shopping for our cousin's wedding, but Sophia spent the whole time lecturing me about assimilation. When I suggested we look for a traditional qipao, she actually laughed out loud. You're going to look ridiculous in that backwards costume, she said while dragging me toward the American department stores. People are going to think you're some immigrant who doesn't understand fashion. She picked out a boring black dress for me and insisted I try it on. See how much better you look when you dress like a real American? She said while I stood there feeling invisible. The wedding was even worse because Sophia refused to participate in any of the Chinese traditions. When our aunts were teaching the younger cousins how to fold dumplings, she sat in the corner eating a sandwich she'd brought from home. That stuff is greasy and weird, she announced loud enough for everyone to hear. I don't know how you people can put that in your bodies. I watched my grandmother's face fall as Sophia rejected everything she'd tried to pass down to us. When the lion dancers arrived, Sophia rolled her eyes and said it was embarrassing cultural theater that had no place at a modern wedding. I got my Berkeley acceptance letter right after the wedding and decided to show Sophia my essay about growing up bicultural. She read the first paragraph and started laughing. I can't believe you wrote about something that boring, she said while crumpling up my draft. Colleges just want diversity points, but in the real world you're just going to be another boring Asian in STEM. She said she was applying to schools across the country to get away from our family and would major in communications instead of something stereotypically Asian. That conversation led to her bringing white boyfriends to every family dinner and making them sit as far from our relatives as possible. Don't worry, they barely speak English, she'd whisper, while my parents tried to make conversation. Then our grandmother in Beijing had a stroke and needed full-time care that our family couldn't afford to hire. We're all moving to China to take care of Nai, my aunt announced during an emergency family meeting. She raised us and now it's our turn to take care of her. Sophia's face went completely white as she realized her worst nightmare was coming true. I can't move to China, she protested while everyone else started making plans. I don't speak the language and I have a life here. The transition to Beijing was everything Sophia had feared and everything I'd been prepared for my whole life. On our first day, she got lost trying to find the bathroom at the airport and had to follow me around like a child while I navigated customs and immigration. This place is insane, she cried after 3 hours of not being able to read street signs or communicate with taxi drivers. The language barrier destroyed her completely because she'd spent years refusing to speak Mandarin. She couldn't order food without me translating and got sick from street vendors because she didn't know which places were safe. Everything tastes weird and I can't pronounce anything, she whined while I enjoyed exploring night markets and regional specialties. Her college credits didn't transfer and she couldn't find work because her communication skills were worse than a kindergartner's. She'd follow me to government offices begging for help with paperwork she couldn't read. I feel like an idiot who can't function in society, she'd cry while I interpreted for our whole family. I'm stuck here with no future while you're thriving, she said bitterly during one of her daily breakdowns. This isn't fair because I worked so hard to become American and now it's all worthless. She'd spend hours crying about missing her old life while I was busy building a new one. I was translating at a government office when Sophia grabbed my arm with desperation in her eyes. You have to help me, she hissed while gesturing at the stack of visa applications she couldn't read. I've been trying to get approval to go back to America for school, but they keep rejecting everything because I can't communicate properly. Her grip tightened as she leaned closer and her voice got dangerously quiet. If you don't translate for me and help me get out of this place, I'm going to report your parents to immigration enforcement. My blood went cold as she smiled cruelly. I know about the fake documents they use to get their green cards, and I have copies of everything hidden where you'll never find them, and if I make one phone call, your entire family will be deported and banned from ever entering America again. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. I pull my arm free from her grip and step back while people push past us with their folders and forms. My hands start shaking, so I shove them in my pockets and tell her I need time to think about this. She opens her mouth to argue, but I'm already walking toward the exit, weaving through the crowd of people waiting in line for different windows. My heart pounds so hard I can hear it in my ears, and I keep my eyes on the floor tiles because if I look at her face, I might start crying or screaming or both. The subway ride home takes forever, and I sit in the corner of the car staring at nothing, while my brain runs through every terrible thing that could happen if Sophia makes that phone call. My parents could lose everything they built in America, all the years of work and saving and trying to give us better lives. By the time I get back to our apartment, my whole body feels tight and wrong. That night, I wait until Mom and I are alone in the kitchen preparing dinner before I tell her everything. She's chopping vegetables for stir-fry, and I'm washing rice when the words finally come out. Quiet and fast, like if I say them quickly, they'll hurt less. Mom's knife stops moving, and she puts it down on the cutting board real careful, then sits down heavy in one of our mismatched kitchen chairs. She looks older suddenly, tired in a way I haven't seen before. She admits there were some problems with paperwork when they first came to America, things that seemed fixed through proper channels years ago, but maybe weren't done completely right. Her voice gets small when she says this, and I realize she's been carrying this worry for a long time, just hidden where we couldn't see it. We sit there in our cramped Beijing kitchen with half-chopped vegetables between us and agree we need to talk to a lawyer before making any choices about Sophia's demands. Mom reaches across the table and squeezes my hand once, then stands up and finishes making dinner like nothing happened, even though everything has changed. The next morning, Mom shows me contact information for someone named Candace Greer that a friend recommended. She's an immigration attorney who does phone meetings for families dealing with problems across different countries. I email her that same night after everyone else goes to bed, typing out the whole situation in careful sentences and trying not to sound as scared as I feel. I explain about Sophia's threat and the documents she claims to have, and my parents' old immigration paperwork that might have issues. My finger hovers over the send button for a full minute before I finally click it and watch the email disappear into the internet. She responds before I even finish brushing my teeth, saying she can talk to us tomorrow morning Beijing time. The quick response makes me feel a little better and a little more worried at the same time, because maybe that means this is serious enough that she's treating it like an emergency. Candace calls right at 9 the next morning, and her voice sounds calm and professional through the phone speaker. Mom and I sit side by side on the couch while Candace explains that blackmail itself is illegal, and Sophia's threats could actually backfire on her if anyone finds out. She says she needs to see a complete record of my parents' immigration timeline and all related documents so she can figure out what the actual risk level is. Her matter-of-fact tone helps me breathe a little easier, even though I'm starting to understand how serious this whole situation could become. She asks detailed questions about when my parents came to America and what documents they used and whether they kept copies of everything. Mom answers in halting English and I translate the complicated parts, watching Mom's face get more and more stressed as we go through the history. Candace says she'll review everything we send and get back to us within 48 hours with her assessment. After we hang up, I feel this weird mix of relief that we have professional help and new worry about what she might find in those old papers. Mom and I spend that whole evening pulling out boxes of old documents from the back of the closet where they've been stored since we moved to Beijing. I sort through immigration forms and old green card applications and employment papers, while Mom translates the Chinese documents we need. Sitting there surrounded by papers, I start thinking about how completely helpless Sophia is in Beijing, without someone to translate for her. She can't read street signs or order food or fill out basic forms without me doing it for her. The culture she spent years being ashamed of and trying to erase is now the only thing standing between her and total isolation in this city. I find a folder full of my parents' naturalization documents, and the irony hits me hard. Sophia rejected everything about being Chinese, and now she's trapped in China, unable to function, while I embraced both cultures, and I'm the one with all the power to help or not help her. It's not a power I wanted, but it's the reality we're living in now. The next morning, I go with Nai to the hospital for her checkup appointment, and Sophia tags along because she has nothing else to do. The intake worker at the front desk smiles when I speak Mandarin and processes Nai's paperwork super fast, asking me questions about medications and symptoms while typing everything into the computer. Across the waiting room, I watch a Western family struggle with a translation app, holding their phone up to signs and looking confused and frustrated. The intake worker tells me my Mandarin is excellent and asks if I grew up in Beijing, seeming impressed when I explain I learned it from my family in America. Sophia sits in a plastic chair in the corner looking lost and useless, unable to help with even simple questions about Nai's medical history. When the worker needs to confirm Nai's birthday and address, I translate smoothly while Sophia stares at her phone, pretending not to notice how completely left out she is of this whole interaction. The appointment takes less than 30 minutes because I can communicate everything clearly, and I catch Sophia watching me with this look on her face that's part resentment and part something else I can't quite name. Outside the hospital, Sophia breaks down completely, her whole body shaking as she starts crying right there on the sidewalk. She says she's scared of being nobody in a country where she can't even ask for directions to a bathroom. Everything she built her identity around, being American and fitting in and erasing her Chinese heritage, means absolutely nothing here in Beijing. I stand there watching her cry and feel this small flicker of something like empathy, because I can see how terrified she really is. But her being desperate and scared doesn't erase the threat she made against my parents. It doesn't undo all the years of her making me feel ashamed for speaking Mandarin or celebrating Chinese holidays or being proud of where our family comes from. So I don't offer comfort, or put my arm around her, or tell her it's going to be okay. I just wait until she stops crying enough to walk, then head toward the subway station while she follows behind me, wiping her face with her sleeve. That evening, my aunt pulls me aside into the small bedroom I share with my cousins and asks me to please help Sophia, because family takes care of family. I look at my aunt's worried face and set a clear boundary right there. I tell her I will not help anyone who is threatening to destroy my parents' lives and get them deported from America. I explain that Sophia needs to take back her blackmail completely and totally before I will even think about helping with her visa applications or translating anything for her. My aunt looks disappointed and starts to argue that Sophia is just scared and desperate, but I cut her off and say that being scared doesn't make threatening family okay. My aunt's mouth closes and she nods slowly, not happy about it but not arguing anymore either. She leaves the room and I sit on my bed feeling shaky but also kind of strong, like I just drew a line in the sand that needed to be drawn. 2 days later, Candace calls back with her assessment of all the documents we sent her. She explains there are some technical problems with how things were filed years ago, but nothing that would likely result in deportation if someone reported it, especially since so much time has passed. However, she strongly recommends we keep her on retainer and start building a paper trail of compliance to protect against any mean-spirited reports Sophia or anyone else might make. The relief I feel isn't complete because there's still some risk hanging over us, but it's manageable risk instead of the end-of-the-world disaster I'd been imagining. Candace gives us specific instructions about what documents to organize and what records to keep going forward. Her calm professional approach makes the whole situation feel less scary and more like a problem we can actually handle if we're smart about it. I forward Candace's contact information to Sophia in a short message telling her that if she wants legal help understanding her options, she should talk to an attorney instead of making threats against family. Then I go through and screenshot all her blackmail messages with dates and times, following Candace's advice about protecting ourselves and building our own evidence. It feels really strange to be building a case against my own cousin like we're enemies instead of family. But Sophia made this adversarial when she decided threatening my parents were an acceptable way to get what she wants. I save all the screenshots in 3 different places, including emailing them to Candace, then put my phone down and stare at the ceiling of our Beijing apartment, wondering how we got to this point where cousins are threatening each other with deportation and lawyers. 2 days pass before Nai's condition changes, and my aunt calls me at 6 in the morning saying we need to get to the hospital right away. I throw on clothes and grab my phone while Sophia stumbles out of her room looking confused and useless. The taxi ride takes forever through morning traffic, and I'm texting Berkeley's admissions office about enrollment deadlines while my aunt sends updates about Nai's blood pressure readings. At the hospital, the intake coordinator speaks so fast I have to ask her to repeat everything twice while I translate for my aunt who's crying and trying to understand what's happening. The doctor explains Nai needs more frequent monitoring and a new medication schedule that requires someone to track dosages and side effects in a detailed log. I spend 3 hours going between doctors and nurses and pharmacists, writing down instructions in both English and Mandarin so my aunt can follow them at home. Sophia sits in the waiting room staring at her phone and can't help with anything because she doesn't understand the medical terms or cultural expectations around elder care. When we finally leave the hospital, my aunt hands me a folder of appointment cards and prescription instructions that I'll need to manage going forward. That night, I'm trying to respond to Berkeley emails about course selection and housing deposits, while also creating a medication tracking spreadsheet for Nai. My aunt keeps interrupting to ask questions about the doctor's instructions, and I realize the family workload just doubled without any discussion about how we'll handle it. 3 days later, Sophia shows me a rejection notice from the visa office, and she's crying so hard she can barely hold the paper steady. I read through the official letter and see immediately that she filled out education verification forms meant for tourists, and left entire sections blank because she couldn't read the Chinese instructions. She's begging me to fix it and resubmit everything correctly, but I remind her about the boundary I set. She accuses me of being cruel and letting her suffer on purpose, but I tell her she made a choice to try this alone, and now she's seeing the consequences of not respecting my limits. She crumples the rejection letter and throws it at me before locking herself in the bathroom for an hour. The next morning, I'm checking family group chat messages and see that Sophia posted a long rant on social media about being trapped in a backwards country that doesn't value freedom or individual rights. Several of our cousins screenshot it before she deletes the post, and now everyone's asking what's going on with her. My aunt pulls me aside after breakfast, demanding to know why Sophia is having such a hard time and whether I'm doing enough to help her adjust. I refuse to make excuses for Sophia's public disrespect of our family and culture, explaining that she's an adult who needs to take responsibility for her own choices and attitude. My aunt looks disappointed and says family should support each other no matter what, but I hold firm on not being Sophia's fixer or translator for her complaints. The family group chat goes completely silent after that, and nobody posts anything for 2 days straight. My aunt mentions during dinner that she found a therapist named Tamara Delgado, who does video sessions and works with people struggling with cultural identity and adjustment issues. She suggests maybe Sophia should talk to someone professional, instead of just complaining to family members who can't really help with the deeper problems. Sophia rolls her eyes and says therapy is just American self-indulgence for people who have too much time and money. She insists she doesn't need to talk about her feelings, she just needs to get back to the US where she belongs. I point out the irony of her suddenly embracing American things when it suits her after spending years rejecting anything Chinese, but she doesn't seem to catch what I'm saying. A week later, I'm on the subway after spending 6 hours at the hospital and 2 hours at a government office sorting out residency paperwork. My chest starts feeling tight and I can't catch my breath properly, and everything around me gets fuzzy at the edges. Sophia is the only family member with me, and she notices something's wrong when I grab the subway pole to keep from falling. She guides me off at the next stop and sits me down on a platform bench, then pulls up some breathing exercise video on her phone. She counts out loud, telling me to breathe in for 4 and out for 6, and after 10 minutes, the panic subsides enough that I can think clearly again. We sit there in awkward silence for a while before Sophia quietly says she'll try one therapy session with Tamara if it might help. It's not an apology for the blackmail or the years of cruelty, but it's the first time she's admitted she might need help with something. Sophia's first video session with Tamara happens 3 days later, and afterward Tamara asks if she can share some context with the family. During a call with my aunt and mom, Tamara explains that Sophia was bullied severely in middle school for being too Asian. Kids made fun of her eyes and her lunch and told her she didn't belong in America. Tamara says Sophia spent her teenage years trying to erase every trace of heritage to fit in and feel safe. Hearing this makes some of Sophia's hostile behavior make more sense, even though it doesn't excuse the blackmail threats. I realize I'd been seeing her as purely antagonistic, when really she's someone who got hurt and responded by rejecting the parts of herself that made her a target. I email Candace proposing a mediated agreement where I'll help Sophia with her visa application if she formally takes back her threats in writing and commits to continuing therapy. Candace responds within hours with a simple contract that protects my family while giving Sophia a path forward. The document states clearly that I'm offering assistance with paperwork, but not guaranteeing visa approval since that's outside my control. I send the agreement to Sophia and tell her she needs to accept these terms if she wants my help. She reads it over for a long time before asking if we can talk about the specific requirements. Meanwhile, Lionel emails asking about my Berkeley enrollment status and whether I'm still planning to start in the fall semester. I explain the family caregiving situation and ask about deferral options and whether there's any way to take classes remotely. He responds the next day saying he completely understands family obligations and suggests that an essay about navigating caregiving responsibilities while maintaining boundaries could be even stronger than my original bicultural piece. His support reminds me that my own goals and future still matter even when I'm dealing with family crisis. I find a beginner Mandarin language meetup that happens twice a week at a community center and send Sophia the information. She actually shows up to the first session, and I watch from across the room as she struggles with basic tones and pronunciation. The facilitator is patient and encouraging, and another student offers congratulations when Sophia successfully orders tea in Mandarin, using the phrases they practiced. I see something like hope flicker across her face for just a moment. It's a tiny victory, but it's the first time she's tried to engage with the language instead of resenting it or pretending it doesn't exist. The following week, we have to visit a government office to handle some family registration paperwork, and the clerk informs us we're facing fines for late submission. He insists on immediate full payment, but I spend 2 hours negotiating in formal Mandarin, using proper respectful address and explaining our family situation with Nai's health crisis. My fluent language skills and understanding of cultural expectations eventually wear him down, and he agrees to let us pay monthly installments instead. Sophia watches this entire interaction without understanding a single word, seeing firsthand how my cultural competence solves real problems that affect our whole family. That evening, Candace emails me a detailed list of documents we should start organizing right away. She wants copies of every tax return my parents filed, all their work permits and residence records, every piece of mail showing their address history in America. She explains that building this paper trail creates proof that my family has been following all the rules, which would make any report from Sophia look like a personal attack instead of a real concern. I spend the next 2 days scanning documents and organizing everything into labeled folders on my laptop. The work feels good because I'm doing something concrete to protect my parents instead of just worrying. I draft a simple agreement on my computer laying out exactly what I'm willing to do for Sophia. I'll help her fill out visa forms correctly and translate basic documents, but only if she stops making threats completely. She has to attend therapy with Tamara every week and go to the language meetup twice a week. I make it very clear that I can't promise her visa will get approved because that's up to the government, not me. I can only help her submit the paperwork properly. The document is 1 page with bullet points, so there's no way she can misunderstand what I'm offering. I email it to her and tell her to read it carefully before we talk. Sophia shows up at our apartment the next morning demanding changes to the agreement. She wants me to guarantee that her visa will be approved, and she wants help immediately without having to do therapy first. I sit at the kitchen table and don't move from my chair. I tell her I'm offering help, not magic, and she needs to understand that her choices over the past few years created this mess. She calls me cruel and says I'm abandoning family when they need me most. I remind her that threatening to destroy my parents' lives is crueler than refusing to let someone blackmail me. She leaves angry and I feel shaky but proud that I didn't give in. 3 days later, Sophia comes back after her second session with Tamara. She knocks on the door instead of just walking in like she usually does. She asks if we can talk about the agreement and her voice sounds different, less demanding and more like she's actually asking instead of telling. She sits down across from me and says, Tamara helped her understand that she can't force people to help her by scaring them. She doesn't say sorry yet, but the change in how she talks feels like progress. I tell her I'm willing to move forward if she's serious about the terms. My aunt agrees to witness the signing and we all sit together in our small living room on Saturday morning. Sophia and I both sign the document and my aunt signs as witness below our names. I immediately pull out my calendar and block off 2 hours every Saturday morning for visa paperwork. I tell Sophia I need to see proof every week that she attended language meetup and therapy. She looks both relieved and angry at the same time, like she's glad to have help, but mad that it comes with rules. I save a copy of the signed agreement to my email and send another copy to Candace for her records. On Monday, I start gathering all the documents Sophia needs for her visa application. I'm going through her school records when I find a letter from her university dated 3 months ago. The letter says she's on academic probation for failing 2 classes last semester, and if her grades don't improve, she'll be kicked out. She never told anyone in the family about this. Suddenly, her desperate need to get back to America makes more sense because she's not just homesick. She's about to lose her spot at the school completely. I feel angry that she hid this, but also understand why she was so frantic. That night, I confront her about the probation letter, She starts crying immediately and admits that her grades fell apart last semester because she was really depressed and dealing with identity problems. She says she felt like a total failure because she tried so hard to be American enough, and it still wasn't working. She was too proud to ask anyone for help or admit she was struggling. Hearing this makes me feel unexpected sympathy for her because I realize her rejection of Chinese culture came from pain and fear, not just from being mean. She was hurting and dealt with it by trying to erase part of herself. I sit down next to her and tell her I understand better now, but that doesn't excuse the blackmail. She nods and keeps crying. I open my laptop and write an email to Lionel explaining my family situation in Beijing and asking about deferral options. I want to know if there's any way to take Berkeley classes remotely while I'm here taking care of Nai and dealing with family problems. He responds the next day with several practical options, including one online class I could take that would keep me officially enrolled while I handle everything here. He says the flexibility exists for students with serious family responsibilities. Reading his email gives me hope that I don't have to choose between taking care of my family and building my own future. I can do both if I'm smart about it. Over the next 3 weeks, Sophia and I work through every section of her visa application. We gather her school transcripts, the probation letter with an explanation, proof of family ties in China, and documentation of her therapy and language learning. I translate everything that needs translation and double-check every form for accuracy. Finally, the packet is complete with all the right information and proper papers attached. We take the subway to the American consulate together on a Tuesday morning. The security process takes forever with metal detectors and document checks before we even get inside. The clerk at the window reviews everything carefully while Sophia grips the edge of the counter. He stamps several pages and tells us processing will take 4 to 6 weeks. Sophia looks terrified at the wait time and the uncertainty. I remind her that we did everything correctly, and now we just have to let the system work. 2 weeks later, I'm helping Nai with her afternoon medicine when my phone buzzes with an email from the consulate. They're requesting an in-person interview for Sophia as part of standard processing. The interview is in 1 week, and she'll need to answer basic questions in English without me there to translate for her. Sophia reads the email over my shoulder and immediately panics because her communication skills have gotten so much worse from months of depending on me for everything. She has 7 days to prepare for an interview she has to handle completely alone. I spend the next 5 days drilling Sophia on basic interview questions at our kitchen table. We practice her explaining why she wants to return to the US and what her academic plans are, but she stumbles over simple answers about her major and graduation timeline. She forgets to mention her language program enrollment and gets defensive when I point out she sounds unprepared. Her hands shake when she tries to describe her career goals, and she keeps looking at me for help instead of answering independently. I make her practice without me translating or prompting, forcing her to find her own words. On the 3rd day, she gets frustrated and snaps that this whole process is just performing for bureaucrats who don't care about individual circumstances. I stop the practice session immediately and remind her about our agreement. She apologizes quickly, but the comment reveals how thin her patience is and how easily she slips back into contempt when things get hard. We reset and continue practicing, but the tension sits heavy between us. The next morning, my aunt is cleaning Sophia's room while she's at her language meetup and finds a folder tucked under the mattress. Inside are printed copies of my parents' immigration documents with sections highlighted in yellow and handwritten notes in the margins. My aunt calls me into the room with tears in her eyes and shows me the evidence Sophia had been collecting. The highlighted parts are the irregular dates and inconsistent addresses that Sophia was planning to use for her threats. There are even draft emails to immigration enforcement that she never sent. My aunt is shaking with anger as she confronts Sophia when she gets home. The family meeting that follows is brutal and painful, as my aunt demands to know how Sophia could threaten to destroy her own family. Sophia tries to defend herself by saying she was desperate and scared, but my aunt cuts her off. She orders Sophia to delete every digital copy and destroy all the printed documents right now in front of everyone. Sophia breaks down completely as she tears up the papers and empties her email trash folder. She keeps saying she's sorry over and over while my mom watches silently from the doorway. For the first time, I see genuine remorse on Sophia's face instead of just self-pity about her situation. She admits she went too far and crossed a line she can never uncross. My aunt tells her that family doesn't weaponize each other's vulnerabilities no matter how desperate things get. The confrontation leaves everyone exhausted, and the apartment feels heavy with unspoken tension for the rest of the week. Interview day arrives with humid Beijing heat that makes my shirt stick to my back as we take the subway to the consulate. I wait outside the security checkpoint while Sophia goes through the metal detectors and document verification alone. The morning stretches out endlessly as I sit on a bench watching other applicants emerge from the building. Some come out smiling and relieved, clutching approval papers and making excited phone calls. Others look devastated with rejection letters in hand and tears streaming down their faces. I check my phone every few minutes, even though I know the interview could take hours. A middle-aged woman sits down next to me and mentions she's been waiting for her son for 3 hours. The uncertainty makes my stomach hurt as I imagine all the ways Sophia's interview could go wrong. She might freeze up or give answers that sound rehearsed and fake. The interviewer might focus on her academic probation and decide she's not a serious student. Administrative processing could drag on for months with no clear timeline. I watch the consulate entrance and count the people going in versus coming out, trying to calculate average wait times. Finally, after 2.5 hours, Sophia emerges looking pale and shaky. She walks toward me without making eye contact, and I can't read whether the news is good or bad. She tells me the interview was rough from the start. The interviewer asked about her academic status, and she had to admit the probation instead of trying to hide it. She stumbled through questions about why she left her US university and why she wants to return now. Her explanation about family caregiving responsibilities sounded weak when she said it out loud. The interviewer asked follow-up questions about her language skills and future plans that she wasn't prepared for. She mentioned the intensive language program, but couldn't remember specific details about the curriculum. At the end, the interviewer didn't approve or deny her application, but placed it in administrative processing for additional review. Sophia doesn't know what that means or how long it will take. The ambiguous result is worse than a clear rejection because now we're stuck in limbo without any timeline. She cries on the subway ride home while other passengers pretend not to notice. I tell her that administrative processing isn't an outright denial, and we still have options for strengthening her case. She nods, but looks defeated. I email Candace that evening explaining the administrative processing result and asking what supplemental materials might help. She responds the next morning with a detailed list of documentation we can submit. Proof of family ties in China would show legitimate reasons for our presence here. Documentation of Sophia's therapy sessions would demonstrate she's addressing her issues seriously. Language learning attendance records would prove she's making genuine effort. Evidence of our caregiving responsibilities for Nai would explain the family situation. I spend the next week compiling everything into organized folders with English translations. Sophia provides authorization letters for her therapy records and language program attendance. I gather medical documents about Nai's stroke and ongoing treatment needs. My aunt writes a letter explaining our family's caregiving arrangement and why we all relocated to Beijing. Candace reviews everything and suggests a few additions, including financial documents showing family support and housing arrangements. The process is tedious with lots of scanning and translating and double-checking that everything is accurate. But having concrete tasks to focus on helps with the anxiety of waiting. I submit the supplemental packet through the consulate's online portal and receive an automated confirmation. Now we wait again with no clear timeline for when they'll review the additional materials or make a final decision. 2 weeks into the waiting period, we're having a quiet family dinner when Sophia asks Nai if she can help fold dumplings for the meal. Nai looks surprised but gestures for Sophia to sit beside her at the table. Sophia's first attempts are clumsy with filling spilling out and wrappers tearing. She watches Nai's practiced hands creating perfect pleats and tries to copy the technique. Her dumplings look misshapen and ugly compared to everyone else's, but she keeps trying. Nai reaches over and covers Sophia's hand with her own, guiding her fingers through the proper folding motion. Tears fill Nai's eyes as she watches Sophia concentrate on getting the folds right. Nobody comments on the moment or makes it into a big deal. We just continue preparing dinner with Sophia working slowly beside her grandmother. Something shifts in the family dynamic during that simple shared task. The gesture feels more meaningful than any apology speech could be. After dinner, Sophia helps clean up without being asked and actually stays to chat with our aunts instead of disappearing to her room. It's a small change, but it represents real effort to reconnect with the family she spent years pushing away. 3 days later, I receive an email from Berkeley confirming my deferral request has been approved. My financial aid package will be maintained with only modest adjustments for the delayed enrollment. I can start classes next fall instead of this spring. Reading the approval feels bittersweet because I'm officially delaying my dreams to stay in Beijing longer. But I also recognize this experience is teaching me things no classroom could. I'm learning about family loyalty and boundary setting and navigating complex situations with no clear right answers. Lionel sends a follow-up email saying that my growth through adversity will make me a stronger student when I do arrive on campus. He mentions that students who've handled real-world challenges often bring valuable perspective to academic discussions. His support reminds me that I'm not losing time but gaining experience that will shape my future work. I write back thanking him for his flexibility and understanding. That night, I tell my parents about the deferral approval, and they look relieved that I'm staying longer. My mom hugs me and says she knows this isn't what I planned, but she's grateful for my help with the family situation. 3 weeks after the consulate interview, I'm helping Nai with her afternoon medication when my phone buzzes with an email notification. The subject line says visa application update, and my hands shake as I open it. Sophia's student visa has been approved contingent on enrollment in an intensive English and Mandarin language program for returning students. The program requires full-time attendance for 1 semester before she can resume regular university courses. It's not the unconditional approval she wanted, but it's a real path back to the US, with requirements that will actually help her skills. I find Sophia in her room and ask her to sit down while I translate the email conditions. She starts crying with relief before I even finish reading. The program starts in 6 weeks, which gives her time to prepare and make arrangements. She'll need to maintain good attendance and passing grades to keep her student status. The language requirements are intensive but appropriate for someone who let their skills deteriorate. She hugs me suddenly and thanks me for helping her even after everything she did. I remind her that the approval came from her own honesty during the interview and the supplemental documentation we provided. She has to do the actual work now that she has this opportunity. That evening, Sophia asks if we can talk privately, and we sit on the apartment balcony overlooking the neighborhood. She delivers a genuine apology for the blackmail threats and admits she was wrong to put my family at risk out of her own desperation. She acknowledges that threatening to destroy my parents' lives was cruel and manipulative, regardless of how scared she felt. She offers to repay part of Candace's attorney fees from money she saved, which isn't much but represents real accountability. The offer surprises me because Sophia hasn't shown this kind of responsibility before. I accept her apology cautiously and tell her that rebuilding trust will take time and consistent action. She nods and says she understands she can't just apologize and expect everything to be fixed immediately. We sit in silence for a while watching the street below. The conversation doesn't magically repair our relationship, but it feels like a genuine starting point for something healthier. The next day, I call Candace and we decide to keep her on retainer for another 6 months in case any immigration issues arise. My parents agree to the ongoing legal support because it provides peace of mind. We spend a weekend organizing all our family immigration documents into proper files with digital backups. Every visa, every work permit, every address change gets documented and stored securely. The proactive approach transforms our situation from crisis management to reasonable preparation. We're not waiting for problems to happen, but building systems to handle them if they do. Candace reviews our organized files and confirms everything looks solid. She sends a summary letter stating our family's immigration status is secure and properly documented. My parents sleep better knowing we have professional support and aren't vulnerable to malicious reports. The whole experience taught us to take documentation seriously and maintain proper records going forward. What started as Sophia's desperate threats became an opportunity to strengthen our family's legal position and protect ourselves properly. A few days later, I opened my laptop and started writing a new essay for Berkeley about everything that had happened since we moved to Beijing. I wrote about learning to set boundaries with family members who tried to manipulate me, and about navigating two cultures from a position of strength instead of shame. The words came easier than my original essay because I was writing about real experiences instead of abstract ideas about identity. I described the moment when Sophia threatened my parents and how I chose to protect them while still offering her a path forward that required her own effort. I wrote about translating at government offices and realizing my bilingual skills were valuable tools instead of embarrassing reminders of being different. The essay took me 3 drafts over 2 weeks because I wanted to get the tone right, showing growth without making myself sound like some kind of hero. When I finally felt satisfied with it, I sent the file to Lionel with a short message explaining that this replaced my original bicultural essay. He responded within a day saying the new essay was powerful and authentic, and showed real personal growth through adversity. His feedback made me realize that writing about the experience helped me process everything that had happened, and recognize how much I'd changed since that day in the mall, when Sophia told me to stop speaking Mandarin in public. The morning of Sophia's departure arrived faster than expected, and our whole family drove to the airport in 2 cars because we couldn't all fit in one. Sophia was quiet during the drive and kept checking her phone like she was looking for an excuse to delay leaving. At the departure terminal, we stood in an awkward cluster near the check-in counter while Sophia got her boarding pass and checked her luggage. When it was time for her to go through security, she turned to face me, and we just looked at each other for a moment without saying anything. She promised she would continue therapy sessions with Tamara through video calls and actually work on her Mandarin through the language program instead of just showing up for attendance points. I reminded her that she could video call me when she needed help with assignments or cultural questions, but she had to do the actual work herself, because I wasn't going to be her personal translator anymore. She nodded and gave me a quick hug that felt stiff and uncomfortable, but also genuine in a way our previous interactions never were. Then she hugged Mom and my aunt and headed through the security checkpoint without looking back. I watched her figure get smaller as she walked toward the gates, and felt a strange mix of relief and worry about whether she would actually follow through on her promises. 2 weeks after Sophia left Beijing, my phone buzzed with an incoming video call from her at 9 in the morning my time. I answered and saw her sitting in what looked like a classroom with other students visible in the background. She held up her phone and showed me her language class in session, and then the teacher called on her to introduce herself in Mandarin. Sophia's introduction was halting and heavily accented as she stumbled over the tones and paused to remember vocabulary words, but she got through the whole thing without switching to English, and her classmates clapped politely when she finished. We exchanged small smiles across the screen, and I told her it was good progress for 2 weeks of classes. She looked tired but less desperate than she had in Beijing, and admitted the program was hard, but she was actually trying instead of just complaining. It wasn't some dramatic transformation like in movies where people suddenly become fluent and confident. It was just small steps forward and a willingness to keep working instead of giving up. After we hung up, I sat there feeling like maybe we were finally moving in the same direction, instead of pulling against each other all the time. The next Saturday, I gathered my younger cousins in Nai-Nai's kitchen and announced we were going to make dumplings together. I pulled out the ingredients Mom had bought and started teaching them the folds that Nai-Nai had taught me years ago when I was their age. My youngest cousin kept making dumplings that fell apart because she wasn't sealing the edges properly, so I showed her how to pinch the dough tighter and use a little water to make it stick. Nai-Nai sat at the kitchen table watching us and occasionally offering corrections in Mandarin when someone's technique was wrong. I set up my phone on a shelf and recorded a short video of all of us folding dumplings and laughing when someone's dumpling looked especially weird. That evening, I sent the video to Sophia with a message saying we were keeping the tradition going. She responded the next morning with a photo of herself in her program's cultural cooking class, attempting to make dumplings. The dumplings in her photo looked terrible and lumpy, and nothing like the neat folds Nai-Nai had taught us. But she was trying, and she looked happy in the photo instead of angry and resentful. I wrote back that practice makes better, and she should keep working on it. Candace sent an email a few days later with the subject line "Case Closure," and I opened it feeling nervous about what it might contain. She explained that since no reports had been filed to immigration enforcement and our family's documentation was solid and properly organized, she was officially closing our active legal matter. She reminded us that she remained available for future consultations if any issues came up, but there was no current threat requiring ongoing legal work. The formal closure felt like the end of a chapter that had been defined by fear and crisis and constant worry about my parents being deported. I replied to her email thanking her for helping us navigate something that could have destroyed our family if we hadn't gotten professional legal advice. She wrote back saying we had handled the situation well by documenting everything and building a proper paper trail instead of just hoping the problem would go away. I printed her final summary letter and put it in our family document folder as proof that we had taken the threat seriously and protected ourselves the right way. My first remote Berkeley class started the following Monday, and I logged into the virtual classroom feeling excited and nervous about balancing coursework with Nai's care needs. The professor went through the syllabus and explained that we would have weekly assignments and 2 major papers due during the semester. I took notes and realized the workload was going to be intense, but probably manageable if I stayed organized and didn't fall behind. After class, I created a schedule that blocked out time for coursework in the mornings and kept afternoons free for helping with Nai's appointments and medication management. The structure worked better than I expected, because having clear boundaries between school time and family time made both feel less overwhelming. Lionel sent check-in emails every couple weeks asking how I was handling the remote format and celebrating when I submitted my first paper on time with strong analysis. I discovered I was actually good at creating systems that protected both my academic goals and my family responsibilities, instead of letting one consume the other completely. Sophia started sending regular updates from her language program through our family group chat, instead of just messaging me privately. She posted photos of her vocabulary list with Mandarin characters and pinyin pronunciation guides covered in highlighter marks and corrections. She shared audio recordings of herself practicing tones and getting them wrong, and then trying again until they sounded closer to correct. She sent pictures from cultural events the program organized, like calligraphy workshops and tea ceremonies that she actually attended instead of skipping. The updates showed genuine effort even though she still made tons of mistakes, and probably would never be fluent after rejecting the language for so many years. But she had stopped treating Chinese culture as something shameful to hide from her American friends, and started engaging with it as something worth learning about. Tamara sent my aunt a progress report saying that Sophia was making steady progress on the identity issues that had fueled her self-hatred and rejection of our heritage. The therapist noted that Sophia was beginning to understand how her middle school bullying experiences had shaped her desperate need to erase her Chinese identity completely. Nai's health improved enough over the next month that the crisis-level caregiving demands decreased to a more sustainable routine. She still needed help with medications and regular doctor appointments, but she wasn't having daily emergencies that required someone to drop everything and rush to handle problems. My aunt and mom sat down together and developed a rotation system where they split the primary caregiving duties instead of expecting me to be available constantly. The new schedule gave me more time for my coursework, and even some personal time to explore Beijing and meet up with other students from online forums. The family adapted to a new normal that worked better for everyone, instead of burning out one person by putting all the responsibility on them. I felt guilty at first about having more free time, but Mom reminded me that I had already sacrificed months of my original plans, and it was healthy to have boundaries around caregiving duties. An email from Berkeley arrived in early April with the subject line Summer Research Program Acceptance, and I opened it immediately with my heart beating fast. The message explained that I had been accepted to a competitive summer research program that I could complete remotely from Beijing, focusing on cross-cultural communication and immigrant family dynamics. The opportunity felt perfectly aligned with everything I had learned during the past year about navigating between cultures and managing family obligations while maintaining personal boundaries. I would work with a faculty mentor to design a research project and present findings at a virtual symposium in August. Lionel had written a strong recommendation letter for my application, highlighting my unique perspective as someone living the exact dynamics I wanted to study. I accepted the program slot immediately and started brainstorming potential research questions about how immigrant families negotiate cultural identity across generations. During a video call in late April, Sophia mentioned almost casually that she had been accepted back to her U.S. university on academic probation with required counseling sessions. I congratulated her and asked about her plans for classes, and she got quiet for a moment before saying she had changed her major to Asian American Studies. I felt genuinely surprised because that was the last thing I expected from someone who had spent years trying to distance herself from anything related to Asian identity. She explained that she wanted to understand the history and context behind the identity issues she had rejected for so long, and that her therapy sessions had made her realize she needed to face these questions directly instead of running from them. I told her I was impressed by her willingness to engage with the exact topics that used to make her so uncomfortable and angry. She admitted it was terrifying to study something so personal, but also felt necessary if she wanted to actually heal instead of just pretending the problems didn't exist. We talked for another 20 minutes about her planned coursework, and I offered to send her some articles I had read for my own research project about intergenerational cultural conflict in immigrant families. My younger cousin knocked on my bedroom door one evening with her laptop and a nervous smile. She wanted help with her college applications and specifically asked about writing her essay on cultural identity. I sat with her at the small desk and read through her first draft about feeling caught between her Chinese heritage and American life. She kept apologizing for the writing being bad, but I told her it was honest, and that mattered more than perfect grammar. We spent 2 hours talking through her experiences, and I shared some of the resources Lionel had sent me about framing bicultural narratives. She took notes and asked questions about how I had approached my Berkeley essay. By the end of the session, she seemed more confident and less worried about whether colleges would care about her story. Walking her to the door, I realized I had become someone other family members came to for this kind of help. The role felt natural because I understood exactly what she was going through. My own struggle with identity had transformed into something useful for others, navigating the same complicated space between cultures. 3 days later, an email arrived from Candace with the subject line, "Final Summary and Case Closure." I opened it immediately and read through her professional assessment of our family's immigration status. She confirmed that all our documentation was properly organized, and we were well-positioned and compliant with current regulations. Reading those specific words released tension in my shoulders that I didn't realize I was still carrying. The fear Sophia had planted with her blackmail threats finally dissolved completely. I printed the letter and brought it to my parents that evening while we ate dinner. Mom read it twice and then folded it carefully. She said we should frame it as a reminder of how we survived this crisis together. Dad agreed and added that hiring Candace was one of the best decisions we made. The letter sat on the kitchen counter for the rest of the week where everyone could see it. Having that official confirmation felt like closing a chapter that had caused so much worry. My final project for the remote Berkeley class was due the following week, and I submitted it with nervous excitement. The project focused on boundary setting in collectivist family cultures, and drew heavily from my own experiences with Sophia and the blackmail situation. I had interviewed 3 other students dealing with similar family dynamics, and analyzed how cultural expectations around duty conflicted with personal needs. The professor's feedback arrived 2 days after submission with a grade of A and comments praising the research design. She wrote that my analysis was exceptionally insightful and showed deep understanding of the theoretical frameworks we had studied. The academic validation felt good, but what mattered more was knowing the insights came from lived experience. I had taken something painful and turned it into scholarship that might help others. The high marks also meant I was ready for on-campus enrollment next semester. I forwarded the grade to Lionel with a thank you for his support throughout the deferral year. Sophia video called me on a Saturday morning looking excited and nervous at the same time. She held up a graded essay with a large A written in red ink at the top. The assignment was for her Asian American Studies course and focused on internalized racism and cultural rejection. She asked if she could read me a paragraph, and I said yes. Her voice shook slightly as she read a section analyzing her own past behavior with surprising self-awareness. She wrote about how rejecting Chinese culture had been a defense mechanism against racism she experienced in middle school. The paragraph acknowledged that pushing away her heritage hadn't protected her, but had actually isolated her from family and identity. Listening to her read her own words about the harm she had caused felt surreal. When she finished, I told her I was proud of her and I meant it. She smiled and said writing the essay had been harder than any other assignment because it required facing things she had avoided for years. We talked for another 15 minutes about her other coursework, and she mentioned her therapist had helped her work through a lot of the material. Before hanging up, she thanked me for not giving up on her even when she had given me every reason to. Berkeley sent an official enrollment confirmation email the next week with my financial aid package intact, and additional scholarship funding based on my remote coursework performance. The scholarship amount was significant enough to cover most of my housing costs for the upcoming semester. I read the email 3 times to make sure I understood everything correctly. The deferral year had taught me things I needed to learn, but now I was ready to move forward. I opened a flight booking website and searched for tickets from Beijing to San Francisco. The prices were reasonable, and I found a direct flight that would get me to campus 2 days before orientation. I booked it immediately and sent the confirmation to my parents. Mom came into my room later that evening and hugged me without saying anything. The excitement about leaving was mixed with sadness about saying goodbye to Beijing and the family here. I knew I was ready to go, but that didn't make departure easier. Nai-Nai's health had improved enough that she could attend a family celebration dinner for my departure. My aunt organized everything at a restaurant near our apartment that specialized in the regional dishes Nai-Nai loved. We filled a large round table with extended family, and Nai-Nai sat in the seat of honor looking stronger than she had in months. Halfway through the meal, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small silk pouch. She opened it carefully and removed a jade bracelet that looked old and precious. She took my hand and slipped the bracelet onto my wrist while speaking in Mandarin. She told me the bracelet had belonged to her mother and had been passed down through our family for generations. She said I had honored our family by staying in Beijing when they needed me, and by setting boundaries when necessary. The blessing felt like recognition that I could be both dutiful and self-protective at the same time. I thanked her in Mandarin and promised to take care of the bracelet. She patted my hand and smiled before returning to her food. The weight of the jade on my wrist felt significant and grounding. My aunt pulled me aside after the dinner while other family members were saying their goodbyes. She wanted to talk privately about everything that had happened with Sophia. She thanked me for helping Sophia even after the blackmail, and said she had learned an important lesson. She admitted that sometimes the hardest family love is refusing to enable destructive behavior. She had been wrong to pressure me to help Sophia unconditionally without requiring accountability first. Hearing her acknowledge that mistake validated all the difficult choices I had made. I told her I appreciated her saying that, and it meant a lot to have her support. She hugged me and said she was proud of how I had handled an impossible situation. The conversation felt like another piece of closure falling into place. We walked back to join the family, and I felt lighter than I had in months. I spent my last week in Beijing walking through neighborhoods I had come to know over the past year. The streets that had felt overwhelming when we first arrived now felt familiar and comfortable. I practiced Mandarin with the street vendors who sold fruit near our apartment, and they laughed at my improving tones. I visited the dumpling shop that had become my regular spot and ordered my usual without needing to look at the menu. The owner recognized me and asked when I was leaving for America. I told her in a few days, and she wished me luck. I walked past the government offices where I had spent so many hours translating paperwork and remembered how lost Sophia had been in those same buildings. The city had become a place where I proved something important to myself about belonging in both worlds. I took photos of random corners and markets to remember these streets later. Beijing would always be part of my story now in ways I hadn't expected. The airport departure happened early on a Tuesday morning with my whole family crowding around me at the terminal entrance. Mom had packed too much food for the flight, including homemade dumplings wrapped carefully in containers. Everyone hugged me multiple times, and my younger cousins cried even though I promised to video call regularly. Mom pulled me aside one final time before I went through security. She reminded me that I could always come home, but also told me to go build my future without guilt. Hearing her give me explicit permission to leave and thrive felt like the final piece of healing from this complicated year. She said I had already given the family everything they needed by staying when it mattered. Now it was time to focus on my own dreams and goals. I hugged her hard and promised I would make the most of this opportunity. Dad took photos of everyone together, and then I grabbed my bags and headed toward the security checkpoint. I turned back one last time to wave, and they were all still standing there watching me go. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophia right before my flight started boarding. She said she was planning to visit Beijing next summer for her language program's immersion component. She asked if I would be around to show her the good dumpling spots I had discovered. I smiled reading her message and typed back that I would make time during my break to meet her here. The request felt different from her old demands for help because she was asking rather than threatening. Our relationship had transformed into something more honest and sustainable over the past year. We would probably never be best friends, but we had found a way to be family that didn't require me to sacrifice my boundaries. I sent the message and put my phone in airplane mode as the flight attendants started their announcements. The plane lifted off and Beijing disappeared below the clouds. I touched the jade bracelet on my wrist and thought about everything that had brought me to this moment, flying toward California and the future I had worked so hard to reach. The campus buildings looked different from the photos I had studied online during those long Beijing nights, when I wondered if I would actually make it here. Lionel met me outside the admissions building wearing a Berkeley hoodie and holding a welcome packet with my name on it. He shook my hand and said he was glad I made it after everything I had been through this year. We walked across campus while he pointed out different buildings and introduced me to 3 other students from the Asian American Studies program who were grabbing coffee at the student center. They asked about my experience in Beijing and seemed genuinely interested when I described navigating government offices and translating for my family. One student talked about her own grandmother in Taiwan and how she struggled with feeling disconnected from that part of her identity. Another student mentioned leading a workshop next month about code switching between cultures and invited me to attend. I felt something relax in my chest that I hadn't realized was still tight from months of being on guard with Sophia. My roommate was unpacking boxes when I arrived at our dorm room, and she looked up with a smile that seemed cautiously friendly. She introduced herself and mentioned she was Korean American, and her parents had pretty intense expectations about grades and career choices. We spent the first evening sharing stories about family dinners, where relatives asked invasive questions and the pressure to succeed in specific ways that felt more about their dreams than ours. She told me about fighting with her mom over choosing sociology instead of pre-med, and I told her about Sophia's years of rejecting anything Chinese. When I explained how I had learned to set boundaries while still helping family, she asked if I could teach her how to do that, because she usually just avoided conflict by lying about her plans. I realized I was actually giving advice from a place of real experience instead of just trying to figure things out myself. The difference felt significant in a way I couldn't quite name, but knew mattered. During the second week of classes, I found information about a student organization that supported first-generation college students from immigrant families. The meeting was in a classroom building basement, and about 15 students sat in a circle sharing their struggles with guilt over pursuing their own goals, while parents sacrificed everything for them. The facilitator asked if anyone wanted to volunteer for their workshop series, and I raised my hand before I could second-guess myself. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of 12 students and talked about my year in Beijing and how I learned that helping family didn't mean erasing my own boundaries. I shared the written agreement I made with Sophia and how it protected both of us by being clear about expectations. Several students took notes, and one person stayed after to ask specific questions about handling parents who used guilt as a control method. Walking back to my dorm, I felt this sense of purpose that was different from just getting good grades or checking off requirements. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophia containing 3 photos from her campus. The first showed her at an Asian Student Association meeting sitting with a group of students around a table covered with food. The second was her attempting to use chopsticks at what looked like a dumpling-making event with other students laughing in the background. The third showed her standing in front of a bulletin board advertising a Mandarin conversation group, with a slightly nervous smile on her face. She didn't write anything with the photos, but I understood what she was showing me. I sent back a thumbs up and a short message saying I was proud of her for trying. My midterm grades came back strong across all my classes, and my academic advisor mentioned that my essay for Introduction to Education Policy was one of the best she had read from a freshman. I scheduled a meeting with the Education Policy Department head to discuss focusing my studies on supporting bicultural students and creating better systems for kids who shouldn't have to choose between cultures. She got excited about my perspective and mentioned several research opportunities that would be available to me as I progressed through the program. The career direction felt like it emerged directly from everything I survived, rather than being something I chose randomly from a list of possibilities. I wanted to help change the systems that made kids feel broken for belonging to two worlds. Finals week exhausted me, but I finished my last exam knowing I had done well and proven I could handle the academic workload, while also building the community connections that made college feel meaningful. Winter break arrived with snow falling outside my dorm window, and I opened my laptop for the scheduled video call with my family in Beijing. Mom and Dad appeared on screen first. Then my aunt joined with Nai sitting beside her looking stronger than she had when I left. They asked about my classes and my roommate and whether I was eating enough. Nai gestured for my aunt to adjust the camera, and then she said something in Mandarin asking me to help translate. Sophia appeared in the frame visiting Beijing for her language program's winter immersion component. Nai spoke slowly, and Sophia responded in halting Mandarin with lots of hand gestures, and Nai laughed and corrected her tones gently. They were talking about dumplings, and Sophia was trying to explain that she had learned to fold them at her campus event. The conversation was messy and imperfect, but they were actually communicating. After the family call ended, Sophia stayed on, and we talked for a few minutes about how strange it felt to both be building lives that was included our heritage, instead of running from it, or using it as a weapon. She admitted she still struggled with feeling like she didn't belong anywhere completely, but her therapist was helping her understand that belonging could be complicated without being wrong. I told her about my education policy plans, and she said that made sense given everything we had been through. We weren't best friends, and probably never would be after what happened, but we had found a way to be family that didn't require either of us to disappear. I hung up the call and touched the jade bracelet on my wrist, and thought about the messy, complicated journey that brought both of us to this place where we could finally breathe. Man, that was a lot, huh? From blackmail to dumpling making together. Wild how things can change when people actually work on themselves. Anyway, if you made it through this whole story, thanks for hanging out. Hit that like button, maybe subscribe if you want more of these. I'll see you next time. Peace.